Hello and welcome to this training session on using the component manager of Sage CRM. We are well through the program that we have started for 2023 and into 2024. This is the 11th lesson within the cycle of 18 that make up the program. Today we're going to be looking at the component manager. This is a very useful tool that will allow us to move sets of customizations from one system to another system. This is an introductory session and it will point to further reading, further learning and further exploration of the feature. But today we're going to look exactly at the operation of the component manager, how the component manager interacts with the metadata of Sage CRM. So that's going to get down into some of the database tables and thinking about what happens inside the database. We'll look at what the scope of the metadata is when it comes to changes to both the metadata of the system, but also opening up the idea that that the component manager can actually also run routines which allow files to be moved around, imported into the system, all of the supporting material that a new customization would need. We're going to look at what happens when you take a component from somewhere and deliver it into a system. So we'll see the impact that that has. We'll then start to look at creating our own basic component, looking at how a set of customizations is recorded. We'll then look at the process of editing the component to make it operate in a safer, better way to deliver the changes that we want, and that will open up to the wider discussion about really complex components that can make a lot of changes across an entire system. And we'll look then at how we deliver components. In fact, delivery of the components is almost implicit in everything that we're doing. So the component manager is this tool that we have for taking metadata and extensions of the system, whether that's written in ASP pages or .NET, to be delivered from a development system into a production system. And it can be used for the passing across of customizations and new screens, new entities, etc. Whether we are wanting to do that from our own internal test environment into a production environment, or from a developer's perspective who is creating a third-party system that wants to be an extension of Sage CRM, which they're actually retailing as a development partner as well. Now, the scope of the metadata that is included within the component is really very comprehensive. So it is about delivery of field customizations, screens, lists. We're going to be looking at an example that includes the customization of a view and actually the delivery of a field that is described within the interface, but is not actually inside the database. We'll also look at purely metadata changes, and we'll also look at the idea of a physical change that's taking place inside the system as well. We also can use the component manager for delivery of customizations that look at all of the things that we've looked at so far in the training. So I've mentioned ASP pages right at the beginning of this session, but also any of the table level scripts and the workflow that we've looked at can also be picked up from one test environment and delivered into a production environment. But it extends across. You can even deliver new new interactive dashboards. So we can look at a whole range of different things, and there are examples on the community which deliver just about everything, like a new workflow, new button groups, new structures, and there are even language packs. You know that Sage CRM is supported out of the box on English, French, Spanish and German. Well, there are in fact part-work language packs for languages such as Italian, Turkish and Dutch as well. So you can start to explore the power of components. And the good thing about the components, we're dealing with an area that is very, very stable when it comes to Sage CRM. It's been like this for a very long time, knowing that components can typically, if they've worked in one version, they can work in the following version. There are exceptions to that, and I'll mention that when we come on to talking about the advanced customization wizard. You have to be careful about making sure that you're using the right version of the advanced customization wizard with the correct version of Sage CRM, because features get added into Sage CRM, and so the advanced customization wizard is designed as a component to be able to take advantage of those components. But let's step on and start thinking about what we need to be able to create a component and deliver it into another system. At the very minimum, in order to be able to do this, we need to have a type of license called an EIS server, Enterprise Integration Server license element contained inside our license key. And this is because if you've just got a standard, what's called a standard license, without that, you can't create new structures and you won't be able to create a component. You can play a component in, so you can deliver a component into a standard system, but you cannot actually create a component if you only have a standard license. So the extensibility features that we're using, if you want to be able to create and then deliver in a component which has new screens, new lists, etc., requires you to have an EIS license. It's not the same if you've just got the standard license, then you can play, and any of the components that you can download from the community are capable of running and installing. Now, in terms of our scope of what we're looking at, you can see here I've come on to look at the metadata tables. One of the things that as we start to explore the component and we make changes, you'll find that the scope of change, even if you're thinking you're only adding a new field in, you may find that you are actually touching on multiple tables within the metadata. Now, we started to explore this when we looked at defining new columns and linking actually external tables into Sage CRM. So if we just take that idea of a new column that we've added into a table like the person table, that new column, that new field, would mean that there was a definition in the custom_edits table, custom_captions, because the label for that field has to be defined. If we've added it into the list, then it will be in the custom_lists, and it will be inside custom_screen objects as well. So there are a lot of metadata tables that will be touched as we add new components in. And even if we make a change, say, of adding in a new option to call the page a new ASP page, we think we've only made one change to the tab by adding a new tab. Well, in fact, because things like fields exist in column orders and they exist within screen orders, and tabs exist within tab orders, there are a sequence of those, we end up touching a whole host of other records within inside the system. So typically, making a change with one field, you actually end up affecting a whole set of other fields, and that metadata can actually end up stretching across a very wide area of the system. So what are we going to do if we're going to create a component? And this is something that we will look at in a little bit, but first what we'll do is we will learn how we install a component, because I think we'll get a lot of that out of that. But the overall pattern of creating a component is going to be starting to record a component, understanding the changes of the database, viewing then the impact of the component, the component script, previewing it, and then going through the process of scripting out the component and packaging it so it can be delivered into the target system. So if we start from the back and go forwards, and that starting from the back is actually thinking about how do we run a component. If someone else has provided a component for us, how do we go about doing that, and how do we go about checking to understand the impact that a component has? Now, unless you know where the components are, you don't have any components available to you. But in fact, we've got quite a lot of components that we can play around with, and these are all up on the community. So if you look for the Sage CRM community, community.sagecrm.com, you will be able to come into the screen and then be able to go down into the downloads area. And so there's a lot of example code, components and other download here ready for you. And what we want to do is to go into the example components and developer resources. And inside here, you can see that there are different components that can be used to demonstrate different techniques. See, that very first one looks at delivery of a new example of the quick look DLL. So it's all about showing you how you would go about delivering a .NET extension into Sage CRM. The one that I'm interested in is actually about marketing. It's the one that will add a budget status column into Sage CRM. So it's all about campaign management. So once you see this page, you can download from this, and it will download, and you can see there I've got a zip file. So components are zip files with a particular name. It's good practice if you're creating your own components to be clear on the version that it's targeted for. So the add button column is there, and we can now, we know where it's where that zip file has been downloaded to. We can come into Sage CRM and start to think about the process of loading it in. So I've come into administration. I can then go into customization, and from customization I'm going to go into the component manager screen. Within the component manager screen, I've got a brand new installed system. I've got no existing components available to me. I can now select to choose the file that I wish to have available as a component. So I can go off and browse to that, and I can then upload the component. You can see that we've now got the idea of a component inside the system. It hasn't been run. If it had been run, it would appear in the lower list. Components typically are designed to be run once. There are some components, like the Advanced Customization Wizard, which allow for multiple execution of that component. We'll look at how you can control that within the parameter file of the component in a little bit. Our component here, I'm going to select and then choose to install the component. Well, actually, before we do that, or as I come to that, I can start to think about what will happen. I can start to sneak preview as to what's going to happen inside this. So if I come to the screen, I need to just mark this as something that I do actually want to install. You can see that there's a part of the parameters. And this screen, by the way, is a parameter screen, which is full of information about what's going on. Some of the parameters here are read-only, but they are nevertheless parameters, except for one, which is a checkbox, which is a disclaimer saying that if everything goes wrong, then it's not my fault. So there's the tick box for the disclaimer. I have to select that. That will allow me now just to preview. I can go ahead and preview what's going to happen. Now we're going to be seeing again later on that everything that we do in the component is actually the execution of a set of scripts. There are functions. So this is a product again of the registration of the eWare DLL on the server. There is a COM library created for the component manager. It's all documented, and we'll be looking at where we see the reference for that in a moment on the help file. But all of that is available. It's telling us it looks okay that this particular function would work all right. I can go ahead now and choose to run this component from the preview, and it's a double check to say that the local host is checking that I want to run this, and then I say yes, I do want to run it, and so it's running the component. So the component may take a little time because it's got to make extensive metadata changes. It then has to do a metadata refresh for Sage CRM. So depending on the size of your system and the amount of customizations already within the system, this may take some time. And if you are running a component, make sure that people are logged out of the system, because when the metadata refresh occurs, they may well be very surprised at what happens. It's not going to throw anybody out, but it's best that you do not have customizations being installed into a system when other users are working there. So I've completed that installation. I can now click on the continue button, and or rather, before I go on to the continue button, let's have a look at the log that has been created. So I can actually download the log. Here is a log file, and that allows me to examine what has happened and did it run into any problems while it was executing. Now, this can be a useful double check, but very often you can design the system so that if any errors occur when you're working with a component, you can say stop and just back out, and everything is nothing is committed at that point. So you can actually design your components with very strict error handling. Here, this is a very simple component. It's just run, it's worked, and everything is happy. And nothing is shown amiss in the logs. So if we come back into that screen, we can now then continue, and we can now see within the component screen that the fact that we've run the component, it's showing below us inside the listing of components. Now, the component that I wrote, that I downloaded, this add budget status column component, actually is a bit cheeky, because normally I would expect that component as an available component to disappear, but I've configured it so it is a multiple install component. It's always available to be installed. Not that you would typically want to run this again, because it's done the work, and it wouldn't be changing anything. It wouldn't do any harm to rerun it, but it doesn't need to be run ever again. Let's have a look at some of the changes that this has been, that this component has implemented. I can go into the campaign list and you can see that I've added here a new column called the budget status column, which has got a graphic in it showing the status of the budget. See which ones are under budget, which ones are approaching breaking the budget, and which one has ruined the budget. I can then go into the administration screen. I can come back into administration and then go to customization, because I want to explore what else this component has done. I'm coming into the looking at the secondary entities and down into the campaigns, and within the campaigns I can see here that I've added the definition of a field there for camp color, or the campaign color being referenced. Now that field is referenced inside the campaign list. So if I look at the list, campaign list, you can see here that the budget status or camp color is shown inside the system. Another change that has taken place is that if I come and have a look at the views inside the view campaigns, you can see that I have used the component manager to deliver a change to the database view, and in this case I've added a derived column into this view. So very simple changes, but actually quite dramatic changes when we think about the way in which that field is defined to be able to use a selection and represent a graphic. Now, coming away from these definitions, so I can return back into thinking really about customization, we should look at what has happened inside the database. What effect has running this component made? If we look inside the database, and here I'm just concentrating on 3 metadata tables, you can see that there is a column in metadata tables called the component column. In these 3 particular tables, we've got custom views, custom edits, and custom lists that I'm looking at. And you can see that they all have a column named differently: CUVI underscore component, COLP underscore component, and GRIP underscore component. So these are all uniquely named, but they're all doing the same job, which is recording which component has made a change to the rows within these tables. Now, this is one of the very important things to realize, that when we run a component, or as we're starting to record a component, any row can only belong to one component. That's because there is only one column, and it can only hold one column value as to which component it's associated with. And all of these are now marked as associated with the add budget status component. So how do we go about creating a component ourselves? We do this, we start off in the component screen by going into component details. Within the component details, I can actually see here I've got a default component called changed. That's the default component that when you install Sage CRM, it will have that, it will be registered, and it will be expecting to me recording changes as we go through. And if we look to see what it contains at the moment, this is showing you that this was a brand new install for me, that I've got no metadata that has been updated. So this is brand new installation, and I have not got anything marked as belonging to the changed component. I could use the change component, but in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own new component. And in this case, I'm going to call my component extra person details. I'm going to provide a description for this, and I'm going to set it to be the current component. This does allow you to pause the component and then record a component. But bear in mind that you cannot have a row of metadata belonging to more than one component. And so that you have to be really mindful when you are working with components to try and do the work together. There are some advanced techniques that you can use to run simply a routine that will say, add all of this data into one component. That's done through the interface, and we may or may not have time for that within this session. But let's assume that I've saved my new component, so we can see that anything that I do now in terms of metadata change will be marked as belonging to that component. And I can then start to do the work that I want to do, which is to come into the person entity. I can see there where I've got columns listed, and I can start to add in my new date of birth column. So I'm going to set this up as a date only field. There it is as the person field, and I'm going to label it. I know straight away that I'm dealing there with editing the custom underscore edits metadata table, the custom underscore captions, and I'm obviously making some other changes to the physical database as well. So I've now got my new column inside the person table, and from there I can go to the screens to be able to customize the main screen that I want. I want to be able to add in, as we can see here, the date of birth. So I've added the date of birth, and I'm going to save that, and that saves into that screen. If we look at what's happened inside the database, because I've changed a field in a screen, I've changed all of the other fields within the screen, and I've changed and updated the wrapping object called the screen object as well. And I've changed, as you can see here, the custom edits, lists, and screens as well. So here we have got a way of being able to check the metadata impact that we're having when we're carrying out our changes. You can see which ones are labeled as belonging to that component. You'll notice that there is nothing in the lists because I've not changed anything in the lists associated with extra person details. If we then look to what we do with that component, we've made all these changes within the metadata. We say we've got a set of columns which are labeled as belonging to a component. We now need to come into the component area again to start to script out our component. So if we come over into here, we can see that it's at this point we can start to generate out the component that we're interested in. If I have a look at the idea of previewing the component, I can see the changes that it's going to make. And you'll notice that the component writes out the components in a logical order. When you look at a generated set of metadata changes, it has to flow in a very logical way. So here you can see that columns are being added before the screen objects are updated. So that, and there is in fact a whole list of things which I'll run through. That's described in the documentation. You can also see that in the further blog articles and training articles that discuss more advanced elements of working with components. But let's assume that we're ready to script out our component. And so we can now script the component out, confirming the name and the description that we're using. And you'll see that we end up with two files. There's the extra person details ECF file, and then there is the extra person details ES file. You'll notice that the ES file is contained inside a folder. That folder, if we were dealing with more advanced or complex components, would contain additional graphic files, script files, and could also contain ASP pages and .NET components that we want delivered into the system. So all of the other stuff would be all bundled into that one folder. But the two business files are always going to be the ECF file, which is the control file. So the extension control file, which is the basically the parameter file, and then the extension script, which is the ES file. So as we look at what's happened, we can see that we now have got our component listed as an existing component within the system. And if I switch across into the component manager, we can see that it's not listed as an available component to install. This is because the parameter file doesn't allow for multiple installations, and it already knows that it has been installed inside the system. So it's not showing up there. What we've created inside the system is these two files, the ECF file and the ES file. What you'll notice is that if you come into the INF folder underneath the installation, so that's underneath program files, Sage CRM, underneath the instance name, in my case it's CRM, there'll be a folder called INF, which is where all of these informational files for the extensions are held. And so you've got the folder, the subfolder for our component, and you've also got the parameter file. We can start to edit these to enhance what the component will do and deliver. So how do we edit our component? How do we change the ECF file and the ES file? The component manager is an API. It's a full install shield type API for implementation of metadata changes. It's automatically generated. Most of the script is automatically generated, but still, nevertheless, it is customization script that is running to effect a change in another field. So it's not as if we are recording changes and copying rows of metadata across. We are generating a script that, when played, will affect those same metadata changes in another file, in another system. You can see that if you come into the developer guide inside Sage CRM, so you go into the Help Center, which is help.sagecrm.com, find the right version of Sage CRM that you're using, find the developer guide, and you will see in here underneath the reference for the component manager methods. We can drill down and look at all of the methods that are available to us. And if we just consider one of these, we can start to see how add column is being used. And so add column is actually one that we're using in our component now to effect a change in the database, because we are adding a date of birth column. You'll see that it has a set of parameters that we can use to to affect the change. This is all generated, but it can be fine-tuned and overridden as to exactly what we want inside the component. So we have our files, and I can load those files then into a development environment like Visual Studio. Here you can see where I've pulled in the ES file. The ES file, because it's got JavaScript, can be associated with the text editor for the development environment that you're using, so the correct syntax highlighting is shown. Something like an ECF file, though, is really just a text file, and there isn't syntax highlighting that would apply here. The ECF file contains these parameters, and you can see that the parameter top level parameters are just showing the description, the directory where the ES file would be found, and then the relevant version of Sage CRM that is being used. We can start to change this. We can add in additional parameters. So there are other parameters that we can add in. So for example, we can control whether or not we want to allow for multiple installs, and whether or not we have very strict error handling, which is if there's an error and we declare an error because something isn't right, we stop the whole execution of the component. We can see how those are used in the example components that we download, or we can download from the community. We can make those changes ourselves as well. So here you can see I've just implemented the change for multiple installs and the error handling strict inside this. Now that, if I just make that inside my components straight away, has an immediate effect, because it would now show up inside the component screen. So before, I wasn't seeing my additional fields in the person tables component displayed there, but now it is. If I look at the component that I had downloaded earlier on, which is the add budget status column component, and I have a look at its ECF file, you can see that it's got more parameters, specific parameters, which invite user interaction. You can see here there are text fields and there's a checkbox. There are other types that you can use. You can have selection lists as well. You can have radio buttons as well inside the interface, and you can make use of the fact that the control of these parameters, the parameters lines themselves are like definitions of fields, and they can be controlled to make read-only or mandatory, or changed in other ways. You can change their captions, for example. Here you can see it's using a trick to make sure that I've got an image file referenced, just to put an icon into the component. I can put a description in place, and then I've got my disclaimer. Now notice my disclaimer is the text that explains this, but then I've also got a checkbox which has to be selected, or will need to be selected, for the component to be able to be run. And I've got some other information that about the file as well listed there. If I use some of these field ideas or these parameter ideas inside my own file, you can see that I've included everything underneath this params section. So that keyword is important. Params, listing down, it knows where to find, it'll know how to read these, and it will interpret text, name, image, and read only, caption equals, and then you can see the path that I've put in here. So this is all very good. I'm now starting to build my own parameters to provide a little bit more explanation as to what my very simple component is doing. and then I can choose to run with that. And here I'm back inside the component manager. I select the component to be run, and you can see that I can now choose to execute it. Now, if I don't, or rather, you can see where I've got the checkbox. If I want to have a checkbox work and be helpful to me as to do its job, I have to handle that. And the place that you handle that parameter is inside the ES file. So the ES file has got the ability to be able to read the parameters being sent in. And in this case, I'm looking at the existing example of the add budget status column component that I had downloaded earlier on. And you can see that I've got a check to read confirm conditions, which was the name of the parameter being passed to it. So here I've got confirm conditions. I'm checking to see whether that particular checkbox is switched on, and if it's not switched on, then I declare valid equals false, and then the error string to be written out. Now, we've met the idea of valid and error string before within the earlier lessons. These are all the internal system variables that allow us to generate and force an error ourselves to be able to switch the attention back into the interface with a message. I'm able to do that, and I'm also able to add my own progress information there with the add message to be able to inform the system administrator who's running my component what's happening and where we are within the component. It adds also check information to demonstrate the progress and reconfirm the options that were made or the changes that are being implemented within inside the system. If I take those ideas from the example that I provided and put it into the extra person details ES file, which is the component I'm creating now, I can use those components very, very neatly myself. We can now try and use this. If I run this component without that checkbox, we'll see that even if I say OK, we're going to get an error message because I have not accepted the checkbox. And so it stops straight away the component. And this is demonstrating how then parameters can be set within the ECF file and read within inside the ES file to control the operation of the component. Now, I want to be able to run that. I want to be able to do that work. And so when I run this, it'll all go across and make the change. Now, what if I want to pick all of this code up that I've spent writing, all the ECF file, the folder, etc. I want to do that. Well, what I need to do is I need to create a zip file, because remember, I started by downloading a zip file that I then loaded in. So here, I just need to select the folder for the extra person details and the ECF file for the X person details. So both of those, and then I need to send it to a zip file to create. You're doing it at this level, not at the INF level. You're doing it at this level, and it will create then a zip file which you can then distribute. There's no more sophistication other than that. If we take the idea a little bit further and think about complex components, I'm just setting the scene into perhaps scope for a further lesson at another time. This would be the advanced customization wizard and what the tasks that the advanced customization wizard does. This is all about parameter files and ES files needing to make decisions around multiple checks about implementation, about what's happening, and then the idea of moving files, changing text within files, renaming the files as they are implemented. So doing a lot of changes. Here you can actually see that this is, if you think about the way in which the Advanced Customization Wizard works, there are a lot of parameter checks. If you've not looked at the Advanced Customization Wizard, please have a look. There are some good little short videos on the YouTube channel about the use of the Advanced Customization Wizard, as well as blog articles that talk about it as well. So you'd have parameter files collecting a lot of information, and then an ES file that is also collecting a lot of information as well. Now, I know that within the scope of 50 odd minutes, we're not going to do more than really scratch the surface. There's a lot that you can do. You can spend a lot of time with the component manager, and the best way to learn the component manager is to download the examples that are available on community.sagecrm.com, and to be able to play with them, look at them, understand what's happening there and how the parameters are being used and how files are being moved across. There are a number of points that you need to be conscious of when you're working with the component manager, because if you get it, it's possible to deliver a whole set of metadata changes very, very quickly. And because they're making direct changes to metadata, there isn't a convenient undo. So you have to be very mindful of what's happening in terms of changing screens, lists, and tab groups. When you make a change to anything that is grouped in a screen, a list, or a tab group, you're changing a whole set of fields. You can edit scripts to remove things that you really don't want to risk changing. So you can do that. You do have to edit components to make sure that you are not delivering horrendous changes that you haven't been aware of. That's why one of the tricks that you need to be conscious of is to work with small components. So you are tightly defining the set of customizations that you want. So don't be frightened about working with short run customizations. So work in a particular screen, make those a component, script it out, and then come back to it and amalgamate it into a larger component after that. So you can see there's a whole set of points to watch around the view creation, about when you're generating things, you want to make sure that people are not in the system because of the metadata refresh, etc. And I mentioned that earlier on. And you can see that there are other do's and don'ts that I recommend here as well. Keep things small, keep things discreet, be very disciplined in the way that you're working. So be conscious of the name that you're giving your component. Be conscious of when you start recording and finish recording. Make sure that you test your assumptions about what the component contains or what it doesn't contain. And then, because it's a script file, add comments to make sure that when you come back to edit this later on, you understand why these lines are included within the component. Well, I think this just about wraps up what we can talk about components really within the time available. I think you probably would agree with me that there is scope for a lot more discussion when it comes to what you can do with components to affect very large scale changes within inside a target system. But what we'll be doing as we go on into the next lessons is looking a little bit around the advanced mail manager. In the next lesson, we'll be discussing the role of web services and the RESTful web service, and then going on to discuss ideas like self-service and the .NET API. Well, if there are no questions coming in, I'd say thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Bye-bye.